Ava still remembers the exact moment her life fell apart. It wasn't the day she lost her friends. It wasn't the day her parents stopped answering her calls. It wasn't even the day her fiancé looked her in the eye and said he didn't know if he could trust her anymore. No, the moment she remembers most clearly was standing alone in her childhood bedroom, staring at dozens of unanswered messages, realizing that every person she loved had chosen to believe her younger sister, Olivia. In a matter of weeks, Ava had gone from being a respected daughter, loyal friend, and successful young woman to becoming the villain in a story she didn't even know was being written. And the worst part was that Olivia seemed to have everyone convinced. Family members who once celebrated holidays with Ava suddenly treated her like a stranger. Friends she'd known for years refused to return her calls. Even people who barely knew her spoke about her as though they were certain of her guilt. For a long time, Ava wondered if she would ever recover from what happened. But what nobody knew at the time was that Olivia had made one mistake. One small, seemingly harmless mistake. And years later, that single mistake would expose a truth so shocking that it would destroy every lie she had carefully built. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. At first glance, Ava and Olivia looked like the kind of sisters everyone admired. They grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Chicago. Their parents worked hard to provide a comfortable life, and from the outside, their family appeared happy and united. Family photographs showed smiling faces during vacations, birthdays, and holiday celebrations. Friends often commented on how close the sisters seemed. Olivia was 2 years younger than Ava, energetic and outgoing, while Ava was thoughtful, responsible, and ambitious. They shared a bedroom during much of their childhood and spent countless hours talking about their dreams for the future. To anyone looking from the outside, there was no sign of the conflict that would eventually tear their family apart. But families often carry stories that outsiders never see. As the years passed, subtle differences between the sisters began to emerge. Ava excelled in school and earned praise from teachers for her dedication. Olivia had her own strengths, particularly her ability to connect with people and make friends wherever she went. She had a charm that drew others to her almost instantly. Family members often described her as the life of every gathering. She could make people laugh, tell entertaining stories, and quickly become the center of attention. It was a quality that many admired, but over time Ava noticed something else. Olivia had an unusual ability to shape people's opinions. She could tell a story in such a convincing way that listeners rarely questioned her version of events. Even when details didn't quite add up, most people accepted what she said without hesitation. At first, the incidents seemed insignificant. Small disagreements would somehow end with Ava being blamed. Misunderstandings between friends often resulted in sympathy for Olivia. Whenever conflicts arose, Olivia seemed to emerge as the injured party, while Ava was left trying to explain herself. Their parents rarely noticed the pattern. To them, sibling disagreements were a normal part of growing up. Ava tried not to dwell on it. She told herself that she was imagining things, that she was being overly sensitive, that none of it really mattered. But as the years went by, the consequences became harder to ignore. By the time Ava reached her late 20s, her life appeared to be falling into place. She had built a successful career in marketing, purchased her first home,
Will you marry
and
me,
recently
Ava?
become engaged to a man
Oh
named
my
Ethan.
God, yes!
Friends described them as the perfect couple. Their wedding plans were already underway, and family members were excited about the future. For Ava, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter. She believed that the challenges of childhood were behind her. She believed that whatever tensions had existed between her and Olivia had faded with age. Looking back later, she would realize how wrong she was. Because while Ava was planning a wedding, someone else was planning something entirely different. And what happened next would force everyone in her life to choose a side. The question is, why would a sister spend years building a story designed to destroy someone she grew up loving? Was it jealousy? Was it resentment? Or was there another reason hidden beneath the surface that nobody had yet discovered? At the time, nobody was asking those questions. They were too busy believing what Olivia wanted them to believe. And that was exactly how she wanted it. What happened next began with a single phone call, one ordinary afternoon, a call that seemed unimportant at first, but would ultimately trigger a chain of events that changed everything. Ava answered expecting routine family news. Instead, She found herself at the center of an accusation so devastating that within days her entire world would begin to collapse. And the person making that accusation was Olivia. The phone call came on a Thursday afternoon while Ava was finishing a presentation at work. When she saw her mother's name appear on the screen, she assumed it was another conversation about wedding plans. Her mother had become increasingly excited as the date approached, often calling to discuss flowers, guest lists, and family arrangements. Ava smiled as she answered, expecting the usual cheerful tone. Instead, she was met with silence. For several seconds, her mother said nothing. Then, in a voice Ava barely recognized, she asked a question that immediately made her stomach tighten. "Is there something you want to tell me about Olivia?" Ava frowned. The question made no sense. She asked what her mother meant, but the response only deepened her confusion. Her mother explained that Olivia had come to see her earlier that morning. She had been crying. According to Olivia, she had been carrying a painful secret for years. She claimed she had finally reached a point where she couldn't remain silent any longer. The story she told was serious enough that Ava initially laughed in disbelief when she heard it. She was convinced there had been some misunderstanding. But her mother wasn't laughing. Neither was her father when he later called. And neither was Ethan when he showed up at her house that evening looking more concerned than she had ever seen him before. Within 24 hours, Ava realized something terrible was happening. Olivia had told everyone the same story. Not just their parents. Not just Ethan. Friends. Relatives. Family friends. Even people Ava rarely spoke to. One by one, they began hearing Olivia's version of events. And one by one, they started pulling away from Ava. The most frightening part wasn't the accusation itself. It was how quickly people accepted it as fact. Nobody seemed interested in hearing both sides. Nobody asked for evidence. Nobody questioned the timing. They simply looked at Olivia's tears, listened to her emotional account, and decided she was telling the truth. Ava felt as though she had stepped into an alternate reality. Every conversation became an interrogation. Every explanation sounded like an excuse. Every attempt to defend herself only seemed to convince people she was guilty. A week later, things became even worse. A family gathering had been scheduled at her parents' home. Ava assumed it would be an opportunity to finally clear the air. She spent days preparing what she wanted to say. She gathered text messages. She reviewed old conversations. She organized every detail she could remember. But when she arrived, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The room felt cold. Conversations stopped when she entered. Several relatives refused to make eye contact. Her uncle, who had always treated her like a daughter, barely acknowledged her presence. And sitting in the middle of the room was Olivia. Calm, composed, looking every bit like someone who had suffered a terrible injustice. Ava still remembers the expression on her sister's face that day. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was confidence. The confidence of someone who believed they had already won. As family members began discussing the situation, Ava found herself trapped in a nightmare. Every time she spoke, Olivia had an answer ready. Every detail Ava challenged was met with another emotional explanation. Whenever contradictions appeared, Olivia somehow redirected attention away from them. By the end of the evening, Ava felt exhausted. The family meeting accomplished nothing. If anything, it made things worse. As she drove home that night, her phone remained silent. No supportive messages. No reassuring calls. Nothing. For the first time, she began wondering whether she was truly alone. Then came the moment that hurt most. 3 days later, Ethan asked to meet. They sat across from each other in a small coffee shop where they had spent countless afternoons planning their future together. Ava expected him to reassure her. She expected him to stand beside her while they worked through the situation. Instead, he stared down at his coffee and struggled to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know what to believe anymore." The sentence hit harder than anything Olivia had said. Because Ethan knew her. He knew her better than almost anyone. Yet even he was beginning to doubt her. Ava left the coffee shop feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. That evening she sat alone in her living room for hours. Questions raced through her mind. Why was Olivia doing this? What did she hope to gain? How had she convinced so many people? Most importantly, what was she hiding? Because despite everything happening around her, Ava couldn't shake one feeling. Something about Olivia's story wasn't right. Small details kept bothering her. Tiny inconsistencies. Moments that didn't fit. Timelines that seemed impossible. The problem was that nobody wanted to hear about those inconsistencies. They had already reached their conclusion. Weeks passed, then months. Relationships continued to deteriorate. Several friends stopped speaking to her completely. Family gatherings took place without invitations. Photos appeared online showing celebrations she hadn't even known were happening. The isolation was devastating. There were mornings when Ava struggled to get out of bed. Nights when she replayed conversations over and over, searching for answers. She wondered if the truth would ever matter. She wondered if people would ever listen. And then something unexpected happened. Nearly 8 months after the accusations began, Ava received a message from someone she hadn't spoken to in years. At first glance, it seemed completely unrelated. A simple message. A simple question. Something most people would have ignored. But that message contained a detail so strange that it immediately caught Ava's attention. A detail connected directly to Olivia. A detail that should have been impossible. And once Ava started investigating it, she would uncover the first crack in the story that had destroyed her life. What she found next would leave her stunned. Because for the first time, she wasn't searching for proof of her innocence. She was about to discover proof of Olivia's deception. And once that door opened, there would be no closing it again. The message came from a woman named Rachel, someone Ava had known briefly several years earlier through a professional networking event. They had exchanged contact information, connected on social media, and occasionally reacted to each other's posts, but they were never particularly close. That was why the message felt so unusual. Rachel wrote that she had been hesitant to reach out. In fact, she had started typing the message several times over the previous few months before deleting it. She wasn't sure if it was her place to get involved. But after seeing another social media post from Olivia discussing her version of events, she finally decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. At first, Ava assumed Rachel was simply offering sympathy. Instead, Rachel asked a question. Has Olivia ever told you about the conference she attended in Denver 3 years ago? Ava stared at the screen. Denver? She vaguely remembered Olivia mentioning a business conference years earlier, but she couldn't recall many details. Rachel then sent another message. Because I was there. And something about her story doesn't make sense. Ava felt her pulse quicken. For months, she had been searching for answers. For months, every lead had ended in disappointment. Every attempt to challenge Olivia's claims had been dismissed. Yet here was someone voluntarily contacting her with information. Information that apparently contradicted Olivia's narrative. Ava immediately called Rachel. What she learned during that conversation would become the first domino to fall. Rachel explained that she had crossed paths with Olivia several times during the conference. Nothing unusual stood out at the time. However, after hearing Olivia's public accusations years later, she began remembering specific conversations and dates. The problem was that those dates didn't match Olivia's version of events. Not even close. Rachel had photographs, conference registration records, emails, group messages from attendees. According to those records, Olivia had been in Denver during a period when she later claimed she was somewhere else entirely. At first glance, it seemed like a minor discrepancy. But Ava knew better. The timeline Olivia had presented was the foundation of everything. If the timeline collapsed, questions would immediately follow. And Olivia had spent years making sure nobody asked questions. For the next several weeks, Ava became obsessed with verifying every detail. She dug through old emails, archived social media posts, calendar entries, travel records, photographs, screenshots. The deeper she looked, the more inconsistencies she discovered. What shocked her most wasn't the existence of the contradictions. It was how many there were. One contradiction could be explained away. 2 might be coincidence. But dozens? That was something else entirely. Ava began building a complete timeline. She printed documents and spread them across her dining room table. Every evening after work, she sat for hours comparing dates and events. Slowly, a different story started emerging. A story nobody had ever considered. A story that suggested Olivia hadn't merely exaggerated the truth. She had carefully constructed an alternate version of reality. And the more Ava investigated, the more evidence she found supporting that conclusion. Still, there was a problem. Evidence alone wasn't enough. The people who believed Olivia were emotionally invested in her story. Changing their minds would require something undeniable, something impossible to dismiss. And Ava didn't have that yet. Then another breakthrough arrived. This time, it came from somewhere she never expected. One evening, while reviewing old social media posts, Ava noticed a photograph from years earlier. At first, the image seemed ordinary. A group of people smiling at a restaurant. Nothing remarkable. But as she examined it more closely, she noticed someone in the background. Someone Olivia had claimed she barely knew. Someone whose name appeared repeatedly throughout her accusations. Ava enlarged the image. Then she found another photo. And another. Then several more. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Olivia had repeatedly claimed certain relationships never existed. Yet photographs showed otherwise. Public posts showed otherwise. Comments and interactions showed otherwise. The evidence had been sitting online for years, hidden in plain sight. Nobody had connected the pieces because nobody had been looking. Ava felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Excitement because she was finally uncovering the truth. Fear because she was beginning to realize how extensive the deception might be. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family disagreement that had gotten out of control. This appeared to be something far more deliberate. Something planned. Something maintained over a very long period of time. And if that was true, one question became impossible to ignore. Why? Why would Olivia invest years of her life creating such an elaborate narrative? What could possibly motivate someone to risk everything? The answer arrived unexpectedly. It emerged from a collection of old journal entries, archived messages, and conversations that Ava had almost overlooked. When she finally stepped back and viewed everything together, a disturbing pattern appeared. Every major accusation, every conflict, every crisis, every moment that damaged Ava's reputation. They all shared one thing in common. Each incident occurred shortly after something positive happened in Ava's life. A promotion, a new relationship, a professional achievement, her engagement, the purchase of her home. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Whenever Ava experienced success, a new problem seemed to emerge. A new conflict, a new controversy, a new reason for attention to shift away from her. For years, she had dismissed those moments as coincidences. Now they looked very different. And for the first time, Ava found herself considering a possibility she had never wanted to believe. What if Olivia's actions weren't driven by anger? What if they were driven by envy? The thought made her uncomfortable. This was her sister, the girl she had shared a bedroom with, the person whose secrets she had protected, the person she had defended countless times throughout their childhood. Accepting that possibility felt like losing a part of her past. Yet the evidence kept leading her in the same direction. And then she discovered something that changed everything. Hidden within a series of old messages was a conversation Olivia had never expected anyone to see. A conversation that directly contradicted years of public statements. A conversation that revealed what she truly thought about Ava. When Ava finished reading it, she sat frozen in silence. Because the words on the screen didn't merely expose a lie. They exposed a motive. And once that motive came to light, the entire story suddenly made sense. But proving it to everyone else would be another challenge entirely. Because while Ava was finally uncovering the truth, Olivia still had something far more powerful. She still had the trust of almost everyone around her. And as Ava would soon discover, people rarely surrender their beliefs without a fight. The messages were buried inside an old account Olivia apparently believed nobody would ever revisit. Ava found them almost by accident while searching through archived conversations connected to one of the timeline discrepancies Rachel had helped uncover. At first, the messages seemed ordinary. Casual discussions, complaints about work, conversations about family gatherings. Nothing particularly revealing. Then Ava noticed a thread involving one of Olivia's former friends, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. As she continued reading, her hands began to tremble. The Olivia presented in those messages was completely different from the person everyone knew. There were no tears, no claims of being hurt, no signs of fear. Instead, there was frustration, resentment, bitterness, and one statement that Ava would never forget. The message had been sent years before the accusations ever surfaced, long before anyone suspected there was a problem between the sisters. In it, Olivia wrote that she was tired of living in Ava's shadow. She complained that every family achievement somehow became Ava's achievement. She described feeling invisible whenever Ava succeeded. Then came the line that stopped Ava cold. If people ever saw her the way I do, they'd stop treating her like she's perfect. Ava read it 3 times, then 5, then 10. The words felt like a puzzle piece finally finding its place. Because for years she had struggled to understand why Olivia would tell such damaging lies. Now she wasn't just seeing anger. She was seeing motive. And motive changed everything. Still, motive wasn't proof. No matter how suspicious those messages appeared, people could dismiss them as emotional venting. Ava needed something stronger. Something that directly connected Olivia to the false narrative she had spent years spreading. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One evening, Rachel called again. This time, her voice sounded urgent. She explained that after their previous conversations, she had contacted another attendee from the Denver conference. The woman happened to work in corporate event management and maintained detailed records of conferences she organized. At first, Rachel simply wanted to verify dates. Instead, they uncovered something much bigger. The event manager still had copies of attendee registrations, travel confirmations, and networking group communications. Among those records was evidence showing Olivia had knowingly provided false information years later when describing where she had been during several key events. Not estimates, not assumptions, documented records. Records with timestamps. Records that could be independently verified. For the first time, Ava possessed evidence that couldn't easily be explained away. But before presenting it, she wanted to make absolutely certain. She spent the next month verifying every document through multiple sources. Every email, every timestamp, every registration, every receipt. She checked everything repeatedly, because she knew what was coming. If she accused Olivia of lying, there would be no turning back. The family would fracture even further. Relationships would be tested, and she might still lose. Meanwhile, Olivia appeared completely unaware of the growing storm around her. She continued posting online, continued sharing her version of events, continued receiving sympathy and support. The confidence she displayed suggested she believed the story was untouchable, and perhaps for a long time, it had been. The problem with complicated lies, however, is that they require constant maintenance. One forgotten detail, one overlooked record, one witness with a good memory. That's often all it takes. And Olivia had accumulated far too many moving pieces. Eventually, one was bound to break. Ava decided it was time. She requested a family meeting. To her surprise, nearly everyone agreed to attend. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because they believed this would finally force Ava to accept what they viewed as reality. Very few arrived expecting their understanding of the past several years to be challenged. The meeting took place on a Sunday afternoon at her parents' house. The same house where family birthdays had been celebrated. The same house where holiday dinners had taken place. The same house where Ava and Olivia had spent most of their childhood. As relatives slowly arrived, tension filled every room. Conversations felt forced. Smiles looked uncomfortable. Nobody seemed certain what would happen next. Then Olivia walked through the front door. Just like before, she appeared calm, confident, certain. Ava noticed something immediately. Olivia wasn't worried. She genuinely believed she remained in control. That realization strengthened Ava's resolve. When everyone finally gathered in the living room, Ava stood. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then she began. She didn't start with accusations. She didn't raise her voice. She simply started presenting facts. Dates, documents, timelines, records, one by one. At first, family members listened politely but appeared unconvinced. Then Ava revealed the Denver records. Several people leaned forward. Questions emerged. Olivia immediately attempted to explain the discrepancies, but her explanations created new contradictions. Ava calmly presented another document. Then another. Then another. The room grew quieter. The confidence on Olivia's face began fading. For the first time that afternoon, uncertainty appeared in her expression. Ava continued. Photographs, archived posts, messages, witness statements. Each piece of evidence strengthened the previous one. Each contradiction became harder to ignore. Family members who had spent years defending Olivia started exchanging confused glances. Ava could see doubt forming, and doubt was something Olivia had never anticipated. Then came the moment nobody expected. One of their relatives asked Olivia a simple question. A question based on the timeline Ava had just presented. A straightforward question. Yet Olivia couldn't answer it. She tried. She stumbled through several explanations. Changed details. Corrected herself. Then changed them again. The room fell silent. For years, people had accepted her words without challenge. Now they were hearing inconsistencies for themselves. The shift was subtle at first, but Ava could feel it happening. The narrative was beginning to crack. And once cracks appear, they tend to spread. What happened next would finally expose the truth that Olivia had spent years trying to hide. A truth so shocking that even those closest to her struggled to believe it. Because the issue was no longer whether she had lied. The issue was how long she had been doing it. And how many lives had been damaged along the way. For several long moments, nobody spoke. The room remained completely still as Olivia sat with her head lowered, tears running down her face. Years earlier, that sight would have immediately triggered sympathy from everyone around her. Someone would have rushed to comfort her. Someone would have reassured her. Someone would have blamed circumstances or misunderstandings. This time was different. This time, people were waiting for answers. Real answers. And for perhaps the first time in her life, Olivia understood that tears alone weren't going to save her. When she finally looked up, her eyes moved around the room. She looked at her parents. She looked at Ethan. She looked at relatives who had defended her for years. And eventually, she looked directly at Ava. What happened next was something Ava had imagined countless times. Yet when the moment finally arrived, it didn't feel satisfying. It felt heartbreaking. Because the person sitting across from her wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an enemy. It was still her little sister. The same little girl who used to borrow her clothes. The same little girl who used to climb into her bed during thunderstorms. The same little girl who once told her she wanted to be just like her when she grew up. And now that same sister was about to explain why she spent years destroying her life. Olivia took a deep breath. Then she began speaking. She said that growing up, she always felt invisible. At first, several family members looked surprised. Their parents immediately tried to interrupt. They insisted they loved both daughters equally. They reminded her of family vacations, birthday parties, school events, and everything they had done for their children. Olivia nodded. She wasn't claiming they didn't love her. She was saying she never felt seen. There was a difference. As she continued talking, the room grew quieter. She described childhood moments that had stayed with her for years. Moments that seemed small to everyone else. A teacher praising Ava. A relative celebrating Ava's achievements. Friends complimenting Ava's intelligence. Family members seeking Ava's advice. None of those moments appeared harmful on their own. But Olivia said that over time they accumulated. Year after year. Eventually, she stopped viewing Ava as a sister. She started viewing her as competition. The admission hit the room like a thunderbolt. Ava felt her stomach tighten. Because hearing those words transformed years of confusion into painful clarity. Olivia wasn't acting out of hatred. At least not initially. She had become consumed by comparison. Every success Ava achieved felt like proof of her own failure. Every compliment directed toward Ava felt like something being taken away from her. Every milestone made her feel smaller. The problem was that nobody knew she felt that way. Not her parents. Not her friends. Not even Ava. Instead of discussing those feelings, Olivia buried them. And buried emotions rarely disappear. They grow. They wait. And eventually, they find a way to emerge. As the years passed, Olivia began noticing something. Whenever she shared a personal struggle, people paid attention. Whenever she described being hurt, people rallied around her. Whenever she appeared vulnerable, she received sympathy she felt she wasn't receiving elsewhere. At first, the stories were minor. Exaggerated misunderstandings. Embellished conflicts. Small distortions that earned her support. Nobody questioned them. Nobody challenged them. And because nobody challenged them, the behavior continued. Then it expanded. According to Olivia, she never originally planned to destroy Ava's reputation. She claimed things gradually escalated. One story led to another. One exaggeration created pressure for a larger exaggeration. Each lie required another lie to support it. Eventually, she found herself trapped inside a version of reality she had created. A reality where she was always the victim. A reality where Ava became the source of every disappointment. A reality where sympathy became addictive. Several people in the room looked stunned. Others looked angry. A few simply looked exhausted. Then Ava asked the question everyone wanted answered. Why didn't you stop? The room immediately fell silent again. Olivia stared at the floor. When she finally answered, her voice barely rose above a whisper. Because people believed me. No one spoke. No one moved. The honesty of the answer seemed to affect everyone. Olivia explained that every time someone believed her story, it became harder to admit the truth. Every new supporter increased the stakes. Every person who sided with her made confession more difficult. Over time, she became terrified of what would happen if people discovered the truth. So she continued, and continued, and continued, until the lies became part of her identity, until she couldn't separate herself from the story anymore. Ava listened carefully. Part of her appreciated the honesty. Part of her felt devastated, because none of it changed what happened. It didn't restore the years she lost. It didn't erase the friendships that ended. It didn't repair the relationship with Ethan. It didn't undo countless sleepless nights wondering why everyone had abandoned her. Most importantly, it didn't explain one thing: the deliberate nature of the accusations, the planning, the manipulation, the calculated efforts to isolate her. When Ava raised those concerns, Olivia couldn't deny them. Instead, she admitted something that shocked the room. She confessed that there were moments when she knew exactly what she was doing. Moments when she intentionally shaped conversations. Moments when she deliberately withheld information. Moments when she encouraged people to view Ava negatively. She admitted she knew the consequences, and she did it anyway. The confession felt like the final piece of the puzzle, not because it revealed something entirely new, but because it confirmed what the evidence had already suggested. This wasn't merely a misunderstanding. It wasn't accidental. It was a choice. A series of choices made repeatedly over many years. Their mother began crying. Their father sat motionless. Several relatives looked away. The reality was painful for everyone, especially because there were no winners. Ava had lost years of trust. Olivia had destroyed her credibility. Their parents were forced to accept painful truths about their family. And the relationships that once seemed unbreakable would never be the same again. Yet despite everything, the biggest surprise was still waiting. Because after Olivia's confession became known among family and friends, another truth emerged. A truth nobody expected. A truth that would completely change how people viewed the entire situation. And ironically, it came from one of the very people who had believed Olivia from the beginning. What this person revealed would expose just how far the deception had spread, and it would leave everyone wondering how many other lies remained hidden beneath the surface. In the weeks following Olivia's confession, word spread quickly among family members, former friends, and people who had been connected to the situation over the years. Reactions varied. Some people felt betrayed. Others felt embarrassed for accepting Olivia's version of events without asking questions. A few struggled to process everything they had learned. For so long, the narrative had seemed settled. There had been a victim and a villain. There had been a story everyone believed. Now that story had collapsed, and many people were left wondering how they had missed so many warning signs. Ava wasn't focused on revenge. Contrary to what many expected, she didn't spend her days calling people out or demanding apologies. The truth was that she felt emotionally exhausted. Years of defending herself, years of isolation, years of questioning her own reality had taken a toll that few people fully understood. She wasn't interested in humiliating Olivia. She simply wanted her life back. But just when she thought the worst was finally over, she received another phone call. This one came from Ethan. Again, the conversation started quietly. He asked how she was doing. They spoke about the family meeting, the confession, the aftermath. Then Ethan mentioned something that immediately caught Ava's attention. Apparently, someone had contacted him after hearing about Olivia's admission. At first, he assumed the person simply wanted to discuss the situation. Instead, they shared information that changed everything. The individual was a former co-worker of Olivia's. Someone who had left the company years earlier. Someone who had watched events unfold from a distance. And according to this person, Olivia's behavior hadn't been limited to family relationships. There were other incidents, other stories, other situations where similar patterns appeared. The co-worker explained that Olivia had developed a reputation for creating conflict while positioning herself as the injured party. Several professional relationships had ended under confusing circumstances. Team members who questioned her accounts often found themselves isolated. Disagreements somehow transformed into stories where she emerged as the victim and others became responsible for problems they didn't create. At first, management often believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was persuasive, confident, emotional when necessary. People wanted to help her. People wanted to support her. But over time, inconsistencies emerged. Records contradicted claims. Emails told different stories. Witnesses remembered events differently. Eventually, several supervisors began documenting concerns. Nothing dramatic. Nothing public. Just a growing awareness that something wasn't adding up. When Ava heard this, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was relieved, not because others had experienced similar problems, but because it confirmed she hadn't imagined what happened to her. For years, she had wondered whether she somehow caused the situation, whether she had overlooked mistakes, whether she deserved some of the blame. Learning that similar patterns existed elsewhere finally answered those questions. The problem had never been her. The problem had been the behavior itself. And once people recognized the pattern, they couldn't unsee it. More individuals slowly came forward. Former classmates, past acquaintances, old friends. Not every story was identical. Not every disagreement involved deception. But enough similarities existed to reveal a consistent theme. Olivia often needed to control how people viewed situations. She needed to influence narratives. She needed validation. And when reality threatened that image, she sometimes altered facts to protect it. For Ava, those revelations were both painful and liberating. Painful because they confirmed years of manipulation. Liberating because they removed the burden she had carried for so long. The burden of believing she was somehow responsible. Months passed. Gradually, relationships began healing. Some friends apologized. Others reached out to reconnect. Several relatives admitted they should have listened sooner. Those conversations weren't easy. Trust doesn't magically return once the truth emerges. Broken relationships require time, patience, consistency, and sometimes, even then, they never fully recover. The relationship between Ava and Ethan remained particularly complicated. Although he eventually acknowledged that he had been wrong to doubt her so quickly, both understood that the damage couldn't simply disappear. Trust had been tested, and rebuilding trust is often harder than creating it in the first place. Still, they chose to move forward carefully. One conversation at a time. One step at a time. As for Olivia, the consequences of her actions continued unfolding long after the confession. Many people distanced themselves. Others maintained limited contact while establishing clear boundaries. Some relationships ended permanently, not because people hated her, but because trust, once broken repeatedly, becomes difficult to restore. Perhaps the most difficult conversations occurred between Olivia and their parents. For years, they had unknowingly contributed to the dynamic by accepting narratives without examining them closely. They weren't bad parents. They loved both daughters deeply. But love alone doesn't guarantee understanding. The family eventually entered counseling together. The process wasn't quick. It wasn't comfortable. And it certainly wasn't perfect. But it helped them begin addressing issues that had existed for decades. Issues nobody had openly discussed. Issues everyone had quietly avoided. For the first time, difficult truths were spoken aloud. And while those truths hurt, they also created opportunities for healing. Several years later, Ava would look back on that period as the most painful chapter of her life. But she would also recognize it as the chapter that taught her some of the most important lessons. She learned that popularity is not proof of honesty. She learned that confidence is not proof of truth. She learned that emotions can influence perception in powerful ways. Most importantly, she learned that people should be heard before they are judged. Because once a false story takes hold, correcting it becomes incredibly difficult. The most shocking part of the entire situation wasn't that Olivia lied. It wasn't even how many people believed her. The most shocking part was how close the truth came to remaining hidden forever. If Rachel had never sent that message, if one witness had stayed silent, if one document had been lost, if one timeline discrepancy had gone unnoticed, the story might never have changed. Ava might have remained the villain in a narrative she didn't create. That reality still sends chills through her years later. Today, family gatherings look very different. Relationships are healthier. Conversations are more honest. And assumptions are challenged rather than blindly accepted. The scars remain. Some always will. But the lies no longer control the future. In the end, Olivia's deception wasn't destroyed by a dramatic confrontation or a single piece of evidence. It was destroyed by something much simpler. The truth. A truth that waited patiently for years. A truth that survived every accusation, every rumor, every manipulation. A truth that finally emerged when enough people were willing to look beyond appearances and ask difficult questions. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson in this entire story. Sometimes the person everyone believes is wrong. Sometimes the person standing alone is telling the truth. And sometimes, One shocking discovery is all it takes to bring years of deception crashing down. So if you found yourself in Ava's position, would you have forgiven Olivia after everything that happened? Or would you have walked away forever? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story kept you guessing until the very end, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more unforgettable true stories, shocking betrayals, and real-life twists that prove